Welcome to The Alternative Investor. Similar to investing in fine art or antique cars, wine investments center on the acquisition of a tangible asset whose value is expected to appreciate over time. In this case, you're purchasing and storing bottles of wine in anticipation of selling them at a higher price point later. Investing in wine may seem a bit sophisticated, but it's something virtually any investor can do if they have the right knowledge and a minimum amount of funds to invest. For more on investing on this particular asset class, we're joined by Roland Peens, who's the Managing Director of Wine Cellar, which is an online wine merchant that sources fine local and international wines. Roland, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Anastasia, thank you for having me. It's wonderful to talk about investing in wine.
So it's not something that is particularly popular in terms of when you look at what people invest in. We often talk about equities, we can talk about art as well, but wine is something that people drink and consume and enjoy. Tell me about, the wine market both globally and in South Africa. How do we fare?
Sure. So this is something relatively new in South Africa, but if you look on an international scale, this investment in wine as an asset class has been around for some time, and really it all started where collectors were seeing that their vintage wines, as they mature, they become less in supply and they become finer in quality because they're reaching maturity. They tended to be a lot more expensive down the line. So a collector would buy a certain amount and then sell a certain amount later in order to fund their drinking. And this has really changed in the last 15 to 20 years with the onset of technology, and there are various trading platforms in mature markets where the pricing mechanism has become a lot more certain, and there's a huge global demand for fine wine. In South Africa, we are a little bit behind the curve. We've come from a history of low-end wines, very inexpensive wines, and the fine wine market has really only been growing for the last 30 years. 30 years in fine wine terms is quite a short period when you consider that in Europe they've been producing fine wines for up to 1,000 years in some of the wine regions.
So say an investor is listening to this conversation and they think, you know what, I've always wanted to invest in wine. It seems so sophisticated. It seems as though there's a high barrier to entry. Talk to me about the work that you guys do and how you help investors or potential wine collectors get their hand on a beautiful bottle of wine.
Sure. So we've been seeing that there's a market for a wine investment for some time, but really without market information and liquidity, really there isn't a product that one can offer. So we've been really working quite hard to build liquidity into the market, to spread the word of how inexpensive and investment-worthy South African wines are. And we've offered a few liquidity platforms to give the investor a little bit more surety that when they're buying wine today, that in the future there's a really good liquid market in order to unlock the investor potential. The way that we've done this is offered investment baskets or portfolios. So an investor would purchase a set amount of wine, and we started off with 100,000 Rand portfolios. We also have 50,000 Rand portfolios, and this portfolio we think is the easiest way and the cheapest way to invest in wine. There's a certain maturity window on each portfolio, and once they mature, we will then assist you in selling it either on an auction platform or on a brokerage platform, or one can sell it privately. So there is a lot more option today than ever before.
When it comes to that selling, I mean, one would assume you buy the wine that you like and you perhaps build up a nice collection. At what point do you know when you need to start selling it and putting it on the market? Because surely people are thinking, well, this is wine, it's delicious, I'd love to drink it, and I also want to have some kind of return on investment.
It's a good, and we're learning as we go. It's still a fairly new concept in South Africa, but we're starting to see that South African wines tend to reach their peak of investment potential, their highest annual growth rates at around 10 to 12 years. That's when they're perhaps also at their peak of maturity, but they still have some time to mature further. But what's happened recently with the Kanonkopol Sour 2015, that was rated by a critic the perfect 100 points, and we've seen that price shoot up immediately. So there is lots to consider in fine wine, but certainly as wine matures and reaches maturity, its investment potential or value should reach maturity too.
One of the things we learned when we were looking at art as an investment is that there's a whole host of things that potential investors need to consider, i.e. when it comes to the storage of your art, you can't just, hang it up anyway. When it comes to wine, what should people consider in terms of storage and the kind of environment it needs to be in?
That's a great question, because we've been receiving many requests over the last few years. I've got this special bottle of wine that was given to me by my grandmother, and it's been on top of the fridge, really looked after very well. Unfortunately, that's not going to cut it. If customers are investing in wine and they want real returns, there needs to be surety that the wine is of good provenance and it's of good quality. And the only way to do that is to store it at the right temperature and in the right conditions. And certainly you can, there are various cellaring businesses that can offer that for you, or you can have your own private cellar. And once we are selling or broking or auctioning a consignment of wine, if we don't know the provenance, then we have to extensively taste through the wines in order to make sure that the quality is what it says.
In terms of prices, what are people looking at for an entry-level, wine collector?
Yeah, so if you look at the world of wine, if one wants to buy a good Burgundy or a good Bordeaux wine or Californian Cabernet, you have to spend $100, which in today's value is about 1,700 Rand. South African wines, I think you can get that quality at about 450 Rand a bottle on average. So our investment wines average around that price. That also gives them a really good scope for price increase. If one buys a 4,000 Rand bottle of wine, its propensity to grow to 5 times is very difficult. Where at 400 Rand, there's lots of appetite up to 2,000 Rand a bottle.
Roland, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. That is Roland Peens, who's the Managing Director of Wine Cellar. Moving on to Bitcoin news, US-based money manager Fidelity Investments is launching its first Bitcoin fund, adding its establishment name and star power to the fledgling, an often controversial asset class. The passively managed Bitcoin-only fund will be made available to qualified purchasers through family offices, registered investment advisors, and other institutions. The minimum investment is $100,000. Fidelity's move comes at a time when the price of Bitcoin has recouped much of its losses since crashing in March in the midst of a coronavirus-induced sell-off. Bitcoin is up roughly 60% this year to trade at around $11,500. That's it from me. I'll be back tomorrow with Books on Point. We have the weather details up next, and then Nzinga Gunta at the top of the hour with more of your news. Goodbye.